Picture this. You're standing in the shadowed corridors of Topkapi Palace in 1650, watching as a figure glides silently past you through the marble hallways. The person moves with an otherworldly grace, neither fully man nor woman, dressed in silk robes that whisper secrets against the cold stone floors. Their eyes hold depths of knowledge that no outsider should possess, secrets about the most powerful women in the Ottoman Empire. This is a eunuch of the imperial harem, and their story is one of the most fascinating and tragic chapters in human history. These men, who are no longer men, wielded extraordinary power in the Ottoman court, serving as the bridge between the outside world and the forbidden realm where sultans' wives, concubines, and daughters lived their entire lives. But the path to this power came at a price so horrific that it defies imagination. Today, we're going behind the curtain to explore the lives of the Ottoman Harem eunuchs, and what you're about to discover will forever change how you think about power, sacrifice, and survival in one of history's greatest empires. Before diving into these forgotten stories of survival and suffering, if you enjoy learning about the hidden truths of history, consider hitting that like button and subscribing for more content like this. Please comment below to let me know where you're listening from. I find it incredible that we're exploring these ancient stories together from different parts of the world, connected across time and space by our shared curiosity about the past. The story begins not in the opulent halls of Istanbul, but in the dusty villages of Africa and the Caucasus, where young boys played in the dirt, completely unaware that their lives were about to be shattered forever. These children, some as young as 7 or 8 years old, were selected not for their crimes or their families' debts, but for their potential. Slave traders looked for specific qualities: intelligence that sparkled in young eyes, physical beauty that promised to develop with age, and most importantly, a certain delicate bone structure that suggested they might survive what was to come. The selection process was methodical and cruel. Boys were examined like livestock, their teeth checked, their reflexes tested, their voices evaluated for pitch and clarity. Those deemed suitable were purchased from desperate families or captured during raids, then began a journey that would strip away everything that made them who they were. The traders knew that only about 1 in 10 boys would survive the brutal transformation that awaited them, but the potential profits made this acceptable arithmetic. The journey to the castration centers was itself a nightmare of biblical proportions. Boys were chained together and marched for weeks across desert landscapes, inadequately fed and given just enough water to keep them alive. Many died along the way from exhaustion, disease, or despair. Those who survived learned their first lesson in the harsh economics of their new existence. Weakness meant death, and only the strongest or most adaptable would live to see their destination. But nothing, absolutely nothing, could have prepared these children for what awaited them in places like the monasteries of Upper Egypt or the medical centers of the Black Sea region, where the unspeakable transformation would take place. The castration process itself was so brutal and dangerous that it was performed far from major cities, hidden away in remote locations where the screams couldn't be heard by civilized society. The procedure varied depending on the location and the skill of the practitioner, but all methods shared the same horrifying characteristics. Some boys underwent partial castration, where only the testicles were removed. Others faced complete castration, where everything was cut away, leaving only a small opening for urination. The tools were primitive: sharp knives, heated metal implements, and crude surgical instruments that would make modern medical professionals weep with horror. Picture, if you can bear it, a young boy held down by strong men while a so-called surgeon approaches with his instruments. There was no anesthesia beyond perhaps a piece of wood to bite down on, no sterile environment, no understanding of infection control. The child's screams would echo off stone walls as the cutting began, blood flowing freely, while the operators worked with practiced efficiency, born of having performed this atrocity countless times before. The immediate aftermath was often worse than the procedure itself. Boys were buried up to their necks in hot sand or packed with burning hot ash to cauterize the wounds and stop the bleeding. Many died from shock, blood loss, or infection during these first critical hours. Those who survived faced weeks of agony as their bodies tried to heal from trauma that defied natural healing processes. The mortality rate was staggering. Historical records suggest that anywhere from 70 to 90% of boys died during or immediately after castration. The survivors were the lucky ones, though they might not have felt lucky as they lay burning with fever, their bodies fighting infections with no medical knowledge to guide their treatment. Some developed complications that would plague them for the rest of their lives: chronic pain, recurring infections, hormonal imbalances that affected everything from their bone density to their emotional stability. For those who did survive, the physical transformation was only the beginning of their metamorphosis. Their voices would never deepen, maintaining the high, clear tones that made them valuable as singers and entertainers. Their bodies would develop differently, often growing unusually tall and thin, with smooth, beardless faces that gave them an almost ethereal appearance. Their bone structure would change, their fat distribution would follow female patterns, and their entire physiology would be altered in ways that set them apart from both men and women. But the psychological transformation was perhaps even more profound. These boys had been literally cut away from their biological destiny, removed from the normal progression of human development and sexual maturation. They would never experience the hormonal surges of puberty, never develop the physical strength and aggressive instincts associated with male adolescence, never know the desires and drives that motivated other men. In a very real sense, they had been created as a third gender, neither male nor female, but something entirely different. The training that followed their recovery was designed to erase whatever remained of their original identities and rebuild them as perfect servants of the imperial harem. They were taught languages, music, literature, and the complex etiquette of Ottoman court life. They learned to move with grace, to speak with cultivated voices, to read the subtle signals and hidden meanings that governed life in the palace. Most importantly, they learned absolute obedience and discretion, understanding that their continued existence depended on their ability to serve without question or complaint. The irony of their situation was profound. In losing their manhood, they gained access to power that no complete man could ever possess. The Ottoman Harem was forbidden territory to all males except eunuchs and the Sultan himself. This meant that eunuchs became the sole intermediaries between the secluded women of the imperial family and the outside world. They carried messages, arranged marriages, managed financial affairs, and served as confidants to some of the most powerful women in the empire. The hierarchy within the harem eunuch system was complex and carefully structured. At the bottom were the newest arrivals, still recovering from their transformation, learning the basic skills they would need to survive in palace life. Above them were the trained eunuchs, who served in various capacities: personal attendants to specific women, managers of household affairs, teachers of music and literature, and guards who ensured that no unauthorized person ever glimpsed the forbidden world within the harem walls. At the apex of this hierarchy stood the Kislar Agassi, the chief black eunuch, one of the most powerful officials in the entire Ottoman Empire. This position was typically held by an African eunuch who had demonstrated exceptional intelligence, loyalty, and political acumen. The Kislar Agassi controlled access to the Sultan's mother and wives, managed the vast financial resources of the harem, and wielded influence that extended far beyond the palace walls into the governance of the empire itself. The path to such heights of power was treacherous and required not just survival of the initial castration, but decades of careful navigation through palace politics that could be more dangerous than any battlefield. Eunuchs had to master the art of being simultaneously invisible and indispensable, present enough to serve effectively, but discreet enough to avoid attracting unwanted attention from jealous rivals or suspicious sultans. Their unique position also made them valuable intelligence assets. Because they moved freely between the male and female worlds of the palace, eunuchs often possessed information that no one else could access. They knew which concubines were pregnant, which wives were plotting against each other, which princes were being groomed for succession, and which officials were falling in and out of favor. This knowledge made them both powerful and vulnerable, as they were constantly balancing the competing interests of different factions within the court. The daily life of a harem eunuch was governed by rigid schedules and elaborate protocols that left little room for personal desires or individual expression. They rose before dawn for prayers, spent their days in service to their assigned duties, and retired only when their mistresses had been settled for the night. Every aspect of their existence was regulated by rules that had been refined over centuries of palace life, creating a system of such complexity that mastering it required years of dedicated study. Yet within this rigidly controlled environment, eunuchs developed their own secret world of relationships, alliances, and personal ambitions that operated beneath the surface of official palace life. They formed bonds with each other, born from shared trauma and mutual understanding of their unique circumstances. These relationships weren't romantic or sexual in nature, but they were profound emotional connections between souls who had been fundamentally altered by the same horrific experience. The eunuchs created an informal network that spanned the entire palace complex. Information flowed through this network like water through hidden channels, carrying news, warnings, and opportunities from one corner of the harem to another. A eunuch serving the second consort might learn of political developments that could affect a eunuch working for the sultan's mother, and this intelligence would be shared through subtle gestures, coded conversations, and carefully timed encounters in the palace corridors. But this network also bred its own forms of competition and betrayal. Eunuchs understood that their survival depended on maintaining their usefulness to their mistresses, and sometimes this meant undermining their fellow eunuchs. Palace records reveal instances of eunuchs providing false information about their colleagues, sabotaging rivals' relationships with powerful women, or manipulating situations to eliminate competition for coveted positions. The psychological toll of this existence was immense and largely hidden from historical view. These men lived in a constant state of emotional suppression, unable to express the full range of human feelings that had been surgically carved away from them. They experienced a form of gender dysphoria that predated any modern understanding of such conditions, existing as neither fully male nor female in a world that recognized only those two categories. Many eunuchs developed what contemporary observers described as melancholic temperaments. They would spend hours staring out palace windows at the world beyond the walls, a world they could never fully rejoin. Some turned to scholarly pursuits, becoming experts in poetry, theology, or music as ways to channel their intellectual energies. Others became obsessed with accumulating wealth and influence, perhaps hoping that power could somehow compensate for what they had lost. The relationship between eunuchs and the women they served was complex and often deeply emotional. These women, themselves prisoners of the harem system in their own way, found in their eunuch attendants the closest thing to male companionship they could experience. The eunuchs became confidants, advisors, and sometimes surrogate sons or brothers to women who were cut off from normal family relationships. Some eunuchs developed particularly close bonds with their mistresses that transcended the typical servant-master dynamic. Historical accounts describe eunuchs who became so devoted to specific women that they would risk their own lives to protect their interests. The famous eunuch Gazanfer Aga, who served during the reign of Sultan Murad III, reportedly wielded enormous influence because of his close relationship with the Sultan's mother, Safiya Sultan. His loyalty to her was so complete that he essentially became her agent in the broader political struggles of the empire. But these relationships also carried tremendous risks. A eunuch's fortune was entirely tied to that of his patron. If she fell from favor, died, or was displaced by a rival, her eunuchs often faced exile, imprisonment, or execution. The palace was littered with the careers of eunuchs who had risen to great heights only to be destroyed when their protectors could no longer shield them from political enemies. The eunuchs also served as cultural intermediaries, bringing knowledge and customs from their places of origin into the heart of the Ottoman court. African eunuchs introduced musical styles, culinary traditions, and artistic techniques that enriched the cultural life of the harem. Caucasian eunuchs brought different languages and literary traditions. This cultural exchange was one of the few positive aspects of a system built on human suffering, creating a cosmopolitan environment within the palace walls that reflected the diversity of the Ottoman Empire itself. Their education was far more extensive than that of most men in Ottoman society. Eunuchs were taught to read and write in multiple languages, including Arabic, Persian, and Turkish. They studied Islamic theology and law, mathematics, astronomy, and medicine. Many became accomplished musicians, playing instruments and composing songs that entertained the women of the harem. This education made them valuable not just as servants, but as intellectual companions to women who were often highly educated themselves but starved for stimulating conversation. The financial aspects of eunuch life reveal another layer of complexity in their existence. Successful eunuchs could accumulate considerable wealth through their positions, receiving gifts from grateful mistresses, collecting fees for their services as intermediaries, and sometimes engaging in trade through networks of contacts outside the palace. The most successful eunuchs owned property, funded charitable institutions, and left substantial inheritances to their adopted heirs, since they could have no biological children of their own. Yet this wealth came with its own burdens. Eunuchs were constantly aware that their prosperity depended entirely on maintaining their positions within the palace hierarchy. They lived in constant fear of political changes that could strip them of everything they had accumulated. Many invested heavily in portable assets like jewelry and precious metals that could be quickly converted to cash if they needed to flee the palace in disgrace. The religious dimensions of eunuch life added another layer of complexity to their existence. Islam, like Christianity and Judaism, viewed castration as a violation of God's creation, yet the Ottoman religious establishment found ways to accommodate the eunuch system within Islamic law. Eunuchs were considered ritually pure for certain religious purposes, precisely because they lacked sexual desires that might contaminate sacred spaces. They were allowed to enter mosques and handle religious texts in ways that other men might not be permitted. Many eunuchs became deeply religious, perhaps finding in their faith some compensation for what they had lost in their physical transformation. They funded the construction of mosques, supported religious schools, and patronized scholars and theologians. Some achieved recognition as religious authorities in their own right, writing treatises on Islamic law and theology that were respected throughout the empire. The decline of the eunuch system began in the 18th century as European influence grew within the Ottoman Empire, and traditional palace structures came under scrutiny from reformers who saw them as obstacles to modernization. The practice of castration was increasingly criticized as barbaric and inconsistent with emerging concepts of human rights and dignity. By the 19th century, the recruitment of new eunuchs had largely ceased, though those already in service continued to hold their positions until death removed them from the palace rolls. The last of the great harem eunuchs witnessed the collapse of the very system that had created them. They saw the Ottoman Empire shrink and weaken, watched as Western ideas penetrated the palace walls, and experienced the gradual dismantling of traditions that had seemed eternal and unchangeable. Some adapted to these changes, using their accumulated wealth and connections to establish new lives in the changing world. Others simply faded away, taking their secrets with them to graves that marked the end of one of history's most unusual social institutions. The final chapter of the eunuch system unfolded with agonizing slowness, like watching an ancient tree die one branch at a time. By the early 20th century, the few remaining eunuchs in the Ottoman palace had become living museums, walking reminders of practices that the modern world increasingly viewed with horror and disgust. These elderly men, their bodies bearing the permanent scars of childhood trauma, wandered the increasingly empty halls of Topkapi Palace, like ghosts haunting their own past. Imagine being one of these final eunuchs in 1908, when the Young Turk Revolution swept through the empire like wildfire. You've spent 60 years perfecting the art of invisible service, learning every secret passage in the palace, memorizing the preferences of 3 generations of imperial women. Now suddenly, everything you've known is crumbling. The new government speaks of equality, human rights, and the abolition of barbaric customs. They look at you not as a person who survived unimaginable trauma, but as a symbol of everything backward and shameful about the old empire. The psychological impact of this transition was devastating for the surviving eunuchs. They had built their entire identities around their unique role in the palace hierarchy. Their sense of self, their understanding of their place in the world, their very reason for existence was tied to serving the imperial harem. When that system began to dissolve, they faced an existential crisis that no one else could truly understand. Where does a eunuch go when there's no longer a harem to serve? Some tried to reinvent themselves in the changing world. A few used their accumulated wealth to establish businesses or buy property in Istanbul's European districts, attempting to blend into the cosmopolitan society that was emerging in the empire's final decades. But their altered bodies, their distinctive mannerisms, and their complete lack of experience with normal social relationships made integration nearly impossible. They remained forever outsiders, marked by their past in ways that couldn't be hidden or explained away. Others retreated into religious contemplation, spending their final years in prayer and meditation, perhaps seeking some divine explanation for the suffering they had endured. They established charitable foundations, funded schools for orphans, and supported institutions that cared for society's outcasts. In helping others who had been marginalized and forgotten, they may have found some measure of peace with their own tragic circumstances. The medical consequences of their childhood castrations became more apparent as these men aged. Their bones, weakened by decades of hormonal imbalance, became brittle and prone to fractures. Many developed what would now be recognized as osteoporosis at ages when normal men were still in their prime. Their cardiovascular systems, affected by the absence of male hormones, made them susceptible to heart conditions and strokes. The very modifications that had made them valuable as palace servants now condemned them to painful and often premature deaths. But perhaps the cruelest irony of their final years was the loneliness that consumed them. These men who had spent their lives surrounded by the intimate secrets of others, who had been confidants to some of the most powerful women in history, now found themselves utterly alone. The women they had served were dead. The palace they had called home was being converted into a museum, and the world they understood was disappearing faster than they could adapt to change. Their deaths, when they came, were often unnoticed by the outside world. No newspapers recorded their passing, no historians documented their final words, no monuments marked their graves. They simply faded away, taking with them centuries of accumulated knowledge about the inner workings of the Ottoman court. The secrets they had guarded so carefully, the intimate details of imperial family life they had witnessed, the political machinations they had navigated, all of it died with them. The transformation of Topkapi Palace into a public museum in 1924 marked the symbolic end of the eunuch system. Tourists now walk through the same corridors where these men once glided silently on their mysterious errands. Visitors admire the ornate decorations of the harem rooms, but they see only the beautiful surfaces, not the human drama that once unfolded within these walls. The guided tours speak of architectural features and artistic treasures, but they rarely mention the men who had been surgically altered to serve as guardians of this forbidden world. Modern visitors to the palace often ask their guides about the eunuchs, having heard rumors or read sensationalized accounts of their existence. But the sanitized explanations they receive barely scratch the surface of the reality these men experienced. How can a 20-minute museum tour convey the psychological complexity of a system that turned children into living symbols of power and sacrifice? How can glass display cases filled with artifacts communicate the human cost of maintaining absolute imperial control over women's lives? The historical record of the eunuch system raises uncomfortable questions about power, consent, and the price of civilization that modern societies still struggle to answer. These men were simultaneously victims and perpetrators, powerless children who became powerful adults, outcasts who wielded enormous influence, and symbols of both the heights of imperial sophistication and the depths of human cruelty. Their story defies easy categorization or moral judgment, existing in a gray area between victim and collaborator that challenges our understanding of historical agency and responsibility. Recent archaeological discoveries have shed new light on the daily lives of these forgotten men. Excavations in the palace grounds have uncovered personal items that once belonged to eunuchs, prayer beads worn smooth by constant use, medical implements that suggest ongoing health problems, and carefully preserved letters written in multiple languages. These artifacts provide glimpses into private worlds that were deliberately hidden from historical view, revealing the humanity that existed beneath the official roles these men performed. DNA analysis of remains found in palace graveyards has begun to reveal the geographic origins of the eunuchs who served there. The results confirm what historical records suggested. These men came from across Africa, the Caucasus, and Eastern Europe, representing a forced migration that brought together people from dozens of different cultures and ethnic groups. Their shared trauma created bonds that transcended the racial and cultural divisions that might otherwise have separated them. The linguistic legacy of the eunuch system can still be traced in modern Turkish. Certain words and phrases that originated in the palace harem, many of them introduced by eunuchs from different regions, became part of the broader language. Food preparation techniques, musical styles, and decorative arts that the eunuchs brought with them from their homelands enriched Ottoman culture in ways that persisted long after the system that created them had disappeared. Perhaps most importantly, the story of the Ottoman eunuchs serves as a reminder of the human capacity for both cruelty and resilience. These men endured unimaginable trauma and transformed it into survival, even success, within the system that had mutilated them. They created meaning from suffering, found ways to exercise agency within oppression, and maintained their humanity despite systematic attempts to reduce them to mere instruments of imperial will. Their ghosts still walk the marble corridors of Topkapi Palace, invisible to the tourists who photograph the beautiful tilework and ornate ceilings. But for those who know their story, these men remain present in every shadow, every whispered echo in the empty rooms, every artifact that speaks to the complex human drama that once unfolded behind these walls. They are the silent witnesses to one of history's most extreme examples of how power can reshape human bodies and souls, and their memory serves as both warning and testament to the enduring strength of the human spirit in the face of unthinkable adversity. As we reach the end of this dark journey through the marble halls of Topkapi Palace, we're left with a story that defies simple categorization. The eunuchs of the Ottoman Harem were neither heroes nor villains, but something far more complex. Human beings who survived the unthinkable and carved out lives of meaning within a system designed to destroy their very essence. Their legacy forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about the price of power and the lengths to which civilizations will go to maintain control. These men, mutilated as children and transformed into living symbols of imperial authority, remind us that behind every magnificent empire lies a foundation built on human suffering that history often chooses to forget. Today, The corridors of Topkapi Palace echo with tourist footsteps, rather than the silent glide of silk robes, but the ghosts of these extraordinary men remain. Their story serves as both a testament to human resilience and a warning about what happens when we reduce people to mere instruments of power. In remembering them, we honor not just their individual struggles, but the countless forgotten voices who paid the ultimate price for someone else's vision of greatness. The eunuchs may be gone, but their whispered secrets still linger in the shadows, reminding us that even the most beautiful palaces can hide the darkest truths.